There was a time when the voice coming out of the radio felt like it would never stop singing. That's what music felt like back then. Permanent, untouchable, larger than any single lifetime. But offstage, away from the cameras and the applause, many of the artists who defined those two unforgettable decades were quietly carrying illnesses the public never saw coming. Some hid it, some fought it in full view of the world. All of them left far too soon. Today we're remembering 20 music stars of the 60s and 70s who died of horrible diseases. Number 20, Rory Gallagher.
Yes, I'm a million miles away.
Rory Gallagher was the Irish guitarist that other guitarists worshipped. Jimi Hendrix reportedly called him his favorite player. And throughout the 1970s, Gallagher built a devoted following with his raw, blues-soaked live shows and his battered sunburst Stratocaster. He toured relentlessly, releasing album after album and playing sold-out arenas across Europe. Years on the road took a toll that fans couldn't see. A combination of prescription medication and alcohol use, taken to manage a growing fear of flying, gradually damaged his liver. By January 1995, during what would be his final performance in the Netherlands, he was visibly unwell. He was admitted to King's College Hospital in London, where doctors determined his liver was failing. He underwent a transplant that spring, and for a while it seemed he might recover. Then a staphylococcal infection took hold, and Rory Gallagher died on June 14, 1995, at just 47 years old. Thousands lined the streets of Cork for his funeral, honoring a guitarist who never chased fame the way his contemporaries did, and who is still remembered as one of the most soulful players of his generation. He never had a manager in the traditional sense, never courted the tabloids, and rarely gave interviews about anything other than the music itself, which is part of why so many casual listeners never learned his name, even as musicians quietly idolized him.
Yes, I'm a million miles away.
Number 19, Lowell George.
And I've been from Tucson to Tucumcari.
Lowell George founded Little Feat in 1969 after leaving Frank Zappa's Mothers of Invention, and over the next decade he built one of the most respected cult bands in American rock. His songwriting blended New Orleans funk, country twang, and slide guitar into something entirely his own, and musicians from Bonnie Raitt to Jimmy Page counted themselves as fans. By the late 1970s, though, years of heavy touring, drug use, and weight gain had quietly worn down his heart. In June 1979, George set out on a solo tour to promote his first album away from Little Feat. After a show in Washington, D.C., he checked into a hotel in Arlington, Virginia. The next morning, he was found dead in his room. He was 34 years old, and the official cause of death was heart failure. His bandmates were stunned. George had always seemed larger than life on stage, and few realized how fragile his health had actually become behind the scenes. Little Feat would later reunite without him, but the band never quite recaptured the sound he built.
I'll be willing to be.
Number 18, Florence Ballard. Before there was Diana Ross and the Supremes, there was simply the Supremes, and Florence Ballard was one of the 3 young women from Detroit's Brewster Douglas housing projects who started it all. Her powerful voice anchored the group's early sound, and she sang on 16 top 40 hits before being pushed out of the lineup in 1967 amid internal disputes with Motown. The years that followed were brutal. A failed solo career, a lawsuit against Motown that went nowhere, and a battle with alcoholism left Ballard living on welfare while raising 3 daughters. In 1975, a financial settlement finally gave her some stability, and she began rebuilding her life and her career. It didn't last. On February 21, 1976, she was hospitalized after complaining of numbness in her arms and legs. The next morning, doctors determined she had suffered cardiac arrest caused by a coronary thrombosis, a blood clot that had traveled to her heart. She was only 32. Her story later inspired the character of Effie White in the musical Dreamgirls, ensuring that her voice and her struggle would never be forgotten. Number 17, Andy Gibb. Andy Gibb was the youngest brother of the Bee Gees, and for a brief, dazzling stretch in the late 1970s, he was one of the biggest teen idols in the world, scoring back-to-back #1 hits and hosting his own television specials. Behind the success, though, Gibb was struggling with cocaine addiction, a habit that quietly weakened his heart for years. By the mid-1980s, his career had stalled and his health was declining. In early 1988, just days after turning 30, he checked into a hospital in Oxford, England, complaining of chest and abdominal pain. On March 10th, doctors determined he was suffering from myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle triggered by a viral infection. His heart, already weakened by years of substance abuse, simply couldn't withstand it. He died that day, with toxicology reports later showing his system was actually clean of drugs and alcohol at the time. His mother later said the damage had been done years earlier. Andy Gibb's brothers went on to become one of the most successful acts in music history, but Andy never got the chance to see it. Number 16. Gene Pitney. Gene Pitney had one of the most distinctive voices of the early 1960s, and he used it on a string of dramatic pop hits that he mostly wrote himself. He was also a prolific songwriter for other artists, penning hits for Ricky Nelson and the Crystals before his own career took off. Unlike many of his peers, Pitney never really stopped touring. Decades after his commercial peak in America, he remained enormously popular overseas, regularly selling out theaters across the United Kingdom. In April 2006, he was in the middle of a UK tour when he played a triumphant, well-reviewed show at St. David's Hall in Cardiff, Wales. It would be his last. The next morning, his tour manager found him dead in his hotel room, lying peacefully, as if he had simply gone to rest after the concert. He was 66. An autopsy determined the cause of death was a heart attack, brought on by severely blocked coronary arteries that had gone undetected. Fans who had seen him perform the night before said he looked and sounded as strong as ever. Number 15. Harry Nilsson. Harry Nilsson never wanted to be a conventional pop star, and that's exactly what made him beloved. He wrote and recorded some of the most inventive pop music of the era, and his soaring cover of a ballad became one of the defining hits of 1971. He was also famously close friends with John Lennon, and the two spent much of the mid-1970s living hard and recording together in Los Angeles. That lifestyle eventually caught up with him. Nilsson had been born with congenital heart problems, and years of heavy drinking placed enormous additional strain on his heart. In February 1993, he suffered a massive heart attack. He survived and spent his final months trying to finish one last album, while pushing his old record label to release a career retrospective. He never got to hear the results. On January 15, 1994, Harry Nilsson died of heart failure at his home in Agoura Hills, California. He was 52 years old, and his final recordings would not be released to the public for years afterward. Number 14. Tammy Terrell. Tammy Terrell's duets with Marvin Gaye produced some of Motown's most beloved love songs, and for a brief, brilliant stretch in the late 1960s, the two were among the label's biggest stars. Terrell had already survived a difficult and abusive early career before Motown, and she seemed finally poised for lasting stardom. Then, in October 1967, she collapsed into Gaye's arms during a live performance at a college in Virginia. Doctors soon diagnosed her with a malignant brain tumor. Terrell continued recording between surgeries, determined not to let her illness end her career, but her condition steadily worsened. She underwent 8 operations in total, gradually losing her eyesight, her hair, and much of her body weight. After her final surgery in January 1970, she slipped into a coma from which she never woke. Tammy Terrell died on March 16, 1970, just a month before her 25th birthday. Marvin Gaye was reportedly never the same afterward, and her voice remains preserved forever in some of the most enduring duets of the Motown era. Number 13. Jackie Wilson. Nicknamed Mr. Excitement, Jackie Wilson was one of the most electrifying performers of his generation, a singer with a 4-octave range whose acrobatic stage moves later influenced everyone from James Brown to Michael Jackson. By the mid-1970s, his commercial peak had passed, and he was performing on nostalgia revue tours to keep working. On September 29, 1975, while singing one of his signature hits during a Dick Clark Oldies show in New Jersey, Wilson suffered a massive heart attack on stage and collapsed, striking his head as he fell. The lack of oxygen to his brain during the incident caused permanent brain damage, and he slipped into a coma. He would remain in that state, largely unresponsive, for more than 8 years. Elvis Presley, a lifelong admirer, quietly helped cover his medical bills. On January 21, 1984, Jackie Wilson finally died of pneumonia in a New Jersey nursing home at age 49. He was posthumously inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 3 years later, a recognition he never got to see.
Lonely teardrops, my pillows never.
Number 12. Bobby Darin.
Could that someone be old Mac the Knife?
Bobby Darin lived his entire career racing against a clock only he could hear. As a child, he suffered multiple bouts of rheumatic fever that left his heart permanently damaged, and doctors quietly told his family he likely wouldn't live to see adulthood. That prediction pushed him to chase stardom early, and by his early 20s, he had already become one of the most versatile entertainers in America, moving effortlessly between rock and roll, jazz standards, and folk. In 1971, his weakening heart forced him into open-heart surgery to implant 2 artificial valves. He recovered and kept performing, often needing oxygen after his shows. In December 1973, one of those valves became infected after Darin skipped a routine round of antibiotics before a dental procedure. The infection spread, and he was rushed into another round of open-heart surgery. He never regained consciousness afterward. Bobby Darin died on December 20th, 1973. At just 37 years old, having lived nearly 2 decades longer than doctors had ever expected.
Could that someone be old Mac the Knife?
Number 11. Ronnie Spector. As the lead voice of the Ronettes, Ronnie Spector helped define the sound of girl group pop in the early 1960s. Her instantly recognizable voice powering some of the era's most enduring hits. Her career survived a controlling marriage to producer Phil Spector and years of industry setbacks, and she spent decades rebuilding her career on her own terms, eventually earning admiration from artists like Bruce Springsteen and Billy Joel, who both helped bring her back into the studio. She kept performing well into her 70s, and remained a beloved figure at music festivals and rock and roll tribute shows. In late 2021, Spector was diagnosed with cancer. Her family later described the battle as brief, and she died on January 12, 2022, at her home in Danbury, Connecticut, surrounded by her husband and family. She was 78. Tributes poured in from across the music world, with contemporaries like Brian Wilson and younger admirers alike remembering her as one of rock and roll's original voices. Number 10. Mahalia Jackson. Mahalia Jackson's voice carried the American gospel tradition into the mainstream like no one before her, and by the 1960s, she was one of the most recognized singers in the country, regardless of genre. She sang at the March on Washington in 1963 at Martin Luther King Jr.'s personal request, and performed at his funeral 5 years later. Behind that immense public presence, Jackson had quietly battled heart disease and diabetes for years, conditions that grew more serious as she aged. In January 1972, she was hospitalized in the Chicago area for complications related to both conditions. On January 27, 1972, Mahalia Jackson died of heart failure linked to her diabetes at the age of 60. She had recorded more than 30 albums during her career and had inspired a generation of singers, including a young Aretha Franklin whose family she was close with. Jackson was posthumously honored with a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award the same year she passed. Number 9. Curtis Mayfield.
Oh, Superfly, you're gonna make your fortune back.
Curtis Mayfield spent the 1960s writing socially conscious soul music with the Impressions before launching a hugely influential solo career, culminating in his landmark soundtrack for the film Superfly in 1972. His career and his health both changed forever on August 13, 1990, when a sudden storm toppled a lighting rig onto him during an outdoor concert in Brooklyn, crushing his spine and leaving him paralyzed from the neck down. Remarkably, Mayfield kept working, recording vocals for new albums while lying on his back in the studio. But his paralysis brought on serious complications from type 2 diabetes, a condition that worsened steadily through the decade. In 1998, doctors were forced to amputate his right leg due to the disease. He was too ill to attend his own solo induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that same year. On December 26, 1999, Curtis Mayfield died in Georgia from complications of his diabetes. He was 57, and his influence on soul, funk, and later hip-hop remains impossible to overstate.
Oh, Superfly, you're gonna make your fortune back.
Number 8. Minnie Riperton. Minnie Riperton possessed one of the most extraordinary vocal ranges in pop music, capable of hitting notes few singers could ever dream of reaching. After years as a session singer in Chicago, she broke through as a solo artist in 1975 with a chart-topping ballad that became her signature song. The following year, at just 28 years old, she was diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent a mastectomy. Rather than hide her diagnosis, Riperton became one of the first celebrities to speak publicly about breast cancer, becoming a national spokesperson for the American Cancer Society and receiving its Courage Award from President Jimmy Carter in 1978. She continued recording and touring even as her illness progressed, determined to keep working for as long as she could. Minnie Riperton died on July 12, 1979, at the age of 31, with her family by her side. Her daughter, actress and comedian Maya Rudolph, has spoken openly over the years about her mother's legacy of courage and openness. Number 7. Duke Ellington. By the time the 1960s and 70s arrived, Duke Ellington was already a living legend of American music, a bandleader and composer whose orchestra had defined jazz for 4 decades. Rather than fading into nostalgia, Ellington kept composing ambitious new work well into his 70s, touring constantly and premiering major sacred concerts in cathedrals across Europe and America. In the early 1970s, his health began to decline as he battled lung cancer alongside pneumonia. Even as his condition worsened, Ellington reportedly continued composing from his hospital bed, determined to keep creating until the very end. He died on May 24, 1974 at age 75, just weeks after his final birthday celebration. Tens of thousands of mourners passed by his casket in New York, and musicians from every corner of the jazz world paid tribute to a man widely considered one of the most important composers America ever produced. His body of work, spanning thousands of compositions, remains a cornerstone of 20th century music. Even in his final years, Ellington insisted on keeping his orchestra on the road almost year-round, telling friends that stopping the band and stopping the writing would have felt far worse than any illness he was facing. Number 6. Cass Elliot.
Make your own kind of music. Sing.
Cass Elliot, known to millions simply as Mama Cass, became one of the most beloved voices of the 1960s as a member of the Mamas and the Papas, and later carved out a successful solo career built on her warmth, humor, and unmistakable voice. By the mid-1970s, she had become a major solo attraction, and in July 1974, she wrapped a celebrated run of sold-out concerts at the London Palladium, widely seen as a personal comeback. On July 29, 1974, she was found dead in a London flat by her friend, singer Keith Moon of The Who. The sudden death was initially surrounded by rumors and misinformation, but medical examiners determined the cause was heart failure. She was only 32 years old. Elliot had struggled with weight and related health issues for much of her adult life, and the strain on her heart proved fatal at the peak of what should have been a triumphant new chapter. Decades later, she remains one of the defining voices of the era's folk rock sound.
Make your own kind of music. Sing.
Number 5. Nat King Cole.
Please give your loving heart.
Nat King Cole began his career as a jazz pianist before becoming one of the most successful vocalists in American history, breaking racial barriers as one of the first black entertainers to host his own national television show. Through the late 1950s and into the 1960s, his smooth baritone made him one of the most recognizable voices on the radio, beloved across generations and genres. A heavy smoker for most of his adult life, Cole developed lung cancer, and his health declined rapidly once the disease was diagnosed. He continued performing and recording for as long as he could, determined not to let illness define his final years. Nat King Cole died on February 15, 1965, at the age of 45, leaving behind a catalog of recordings that remain holiday and radio staples to this day. His daughter, Natalie Cole, would go on to have her own celebrated singing career, later recording a technologically assisted duet with her father's voice that introduced him to an entirely new generation of listeners.
Please give your loving heart.
Number 4. Louis Armstrong.
Kiss the real dream on.
Louis Armstrong wasn't just a jazz musician. He was one of the most influential artists America has ever produced. And by the 1960s, his gravelly voice and trumpet were known worldwide. Even in his 60s, he remained a constant touring and recording presence, scoring one of the biggest hits of his career in 1964 with a song that unexpectedly knocked the Beatles off the top of the charts. Years of heavy touring and heart trouble caught up with him in his final years. He suffered a serious heart attack in 1968 and spent much of the following years managing declining health, though he continued performing whenever he was able. On July 6, 1971, Louis Armstrong died in his sleep at his home in Queens, New York from a heart attack, just weeks after what would be one of his final public performances. He was 69 years old. His influence on jazz and on popular music as a whole is still considered immeasurable more than 50 years later. Doctors had actually urged him to stop performing entirely after his 1968 heart attack, but Armstrong found it almost impossible to stay off the stage, telling those close to him that playing trumpet and singing for an audience were the things that kept him going in the first place.
Kiss the real dream on.
Number 3. Roy Orbison.
Pretty woman, walking down the street, pretty woman.
Roy Orbison spent the early 1960s as one of rock and roll's most operatic voices, known for his haunting ballads and his trademark dark sunglasses. His career quieted through much of the 1970s, but by the late 1980s, he was experiencing a remarkable creative rebirth, joining the supergroup The Traveling Wilburys alongside Bob Dylan and George Harrison, and recording a hit new solo album. Orbison had suffered heart attacks decades earlier, and the underlying heart disease never fully went away, even during his years out of the spotlight. On December 6, 1988, just as his comeback was reaching its peak, Orbison suffered a fatal heart attack at his mother's home in Tennessee. He was only 52. His final solo album was released just weeks after his death and became one of the biggest successes of his career, a bittersweet reminder of a voice that was only just beginning to be rediscovered by a new audience.
Pretty woman, walking down the street, pretty woman.
Number 2. Karen Carpenter.
Just like me, they long to be.
As one half of the Carpenters alongside her brother Richard, Karen Carpenter had one of the most beloved and technically gifted voices in pop music history, carrying the duo to enormous global success throughout the 1970s. Behind the scenes, Carpenter was quietly struggling with anorexia nervosa, an eating disorder that, at the time, was barely understood by the public or even by many doctors. As her illness progressed through the decade, her weight dropped to dangerously low levels, and the physical toll on her body became severe, even as her voice remained as pure as ever on record. By the early 1980s, she had begun seeking treatment and appeared to be making progress toward recovery. On February 4th, 1983, Karen Carpenter collapsed at her parents' home in California. She was rushed to the hospital but could not be revived. Doctors determined that years of malnutrition had severely weakened her heart, leading to heart failure. She was only 32. Her death brought national attention to eating disorders in a way nothing had before it.
Just like me, they long to be.
Number 1. Freddie Mercury. Freddie Mercury was, by nearly any measure, one of the greatest performers rock music has ever produced. As the frontman of Queen, his voice and his showmanship turned stadium concerts into something closer to theater, and songs written throughout the 1970s remain some of the most performed and beloved in music history. In the mid-1980s, Mercury was diagnosed with HIV, at a time when the disease carried enormous stigma, and there were few effective treatments available. He kept his diagnosis private for years, continuing to write and record with Queen, even as his health quietly declined. Only one day before his death, on November 23, 1991, Mercury publicly confirmed that he had AIDS in a statement released to the press. On November 24, 1991, Freddie Mercury died at his home in London from bronchopneumonia, a complication brought on by AIDS. He was 45 years old. His death helped raise global awareness of the disease at a critical moment, and a massive tribute concert held at Wembley Stadium the following year raised significant funds for AIDS research, cementing his legacy far beyond music alone. His bandmates later said that Mercury kept recording vocals for what would become Queen's final studio album with him, right up until his strength gave out, determined to leave behind as much music as he possibly could.
We will rock you.
That's 20 voices that shaped two of the most unforgettable decades in music history, each one silenced far too early by illnesses that medicine at the time couldn't always catch, treat, or even fully understand. Their records are still spinning on turntables, their songs are still playing on the radio, and for anyone who grew up with this music, their voices never really left. If you enjoyed taking this walk down memory lane, give this video a like, subscribe for more stories from the golden age of music, and let us know in the comments which of these artists meant the most to you growing up. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.